Hello everyone, welcome back to another feature episode on the Band of Insiders podcast. My name is Franz Jacobs and I'm again going to dive deep into a new topic when it comes to technology and innovation. Today is a little bit different, or if you have been reading my articles, it's very familiar to you, but at least for the podcast and video episodes, it is a little different as we are going to take a deep dive into an historic topic. We're going to look back at how we got to the internet that we have today, and that did not happen without a fight. The goal of these episodes are to teach you something new or educate you on a topic that you didn't know about before and why it's important, right? And what's very interesting about looking at history is that it gives us a little bit of an idea of how things evolved and how we got here, but it also gives us an idea of how the future could potentially unfold. So that's why it's so interesting to sometimes do these historical deep dives as we're going to do today. So without further ado, let's jump in. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something new and see you on the other side. So today we're going to talk about the battle for encryption, a history of freedom online. We are living in an interesting moment in time, and it feels like many very defining technologies and trends are taking shape. Some of those have turned into massive non-physical battles, it feels like. It's crypto versus banks, centralization versus decentralization, open source versus closed source, big tech versus your privacy, you versus bots, and probably many more. A lot of these wars have important outcomes as they will determine how our future internet and digital lives will take shape. Will we live in a world where the immense power of AI is in the hand of a very few people, or will it be in the hands of everyone? And which one of those is the safer option? That is just one example of the current battles being fought. This is not the first time that these battles, for lack of better words, happened when it comes to our internet. The internet as we know it today could have looked a lot different if the outcomes of one of these battles would have been different. To understand how we got here today might give us a bit of understanding into how the future will unfold, and especially why these battles matter so much. So, as I said in the intro, time for another history lesson, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the cryptography wars, a 2-decade-long struggle in order to make sure that today we can encrypt things on the internet. So let me make something very clear before you think, here's Franz again with another crypto story. Crypto is not cryptography. Crypto, coins, tokens, blockchains actually exist thanks to cryptography, but cryptography itself is simply the math that scrambles information so only the right person can read it. Think of cryptography as the locks and keys of the digital world. At its core, it works in two ways. First, symmetric encryption. It's like sharing a house key. The same key locks and unlocks the door. It's fast and simple, but it has one big problem. You need a safe way to hand over the key in the first place. If someone intercepts it, they can open up everything. But this is still widely used today, though, in, for example, Wi-Fi, hard drive encryption, and in messaging apps once connection is established. The reason for that is it's still very fast and efficient. But then there's asymmetric encryption, also called public key cryptography. This solved the problem in the 1970s. Imagine a mailbox. Anyone can drop a letter in using the public slot, but only the person with the private key can open it. Suddenly, you could send secrets to strangers without ever meeting them to exchange keys first. This is a system that now powers secure messaging apps like WhatsApp and iMessage, your online banking login, email encryption, and even blockchain transactions. In other words, without cryptography, our digital lives would have been completely open. Now you can already feel it coming. This did not happen without a fight. So let's start at the very beginning, the birth of the internet. The first recorded message of the internet took place on 10:30 p.m. on October 29, 1969. It's a record, an expert from an IMP log that was kept at UCLA. Professor Kleinrock was supervising his student/programmer Charlie Klein, and they set up a message transmission to go from the UCLA SDS Sigma 7 host computer to another programmer named Bill Duval at the SRI-SDS 940 host. The transmission itself was simply to log in to SRI from UCLA. They succeeded in transmitting the I and the O, and then the system crashed. Hence, the first message on the internet was IO. They were able to do the full login about an hour later. While the early internet wasn't built with any privacy in mind. The goal was openness and collaboration. Academics wanted to share files and not hide them. Therefore, privacy was not needed. That worked fine when only universities, governments, and a handful of companies were online. But by the late 80s and early 90s, more people and businesses started joining. Suddenly, the flaws became obvious. The internet was like a giant postcard system. Every email, every login, every credit card number could be read by anyone handling the traffic, whether that was a nosy administrator, a hacker, or a government agency. This is the moment when cryptography moved from being an academic curiosity to a survival tool. If the internet was ever going to support commerce, private communication, or even basic trust, it needed locks on the doors. And that is exactly where the conflict began, because governments weren't ready to let go of the keys. So in the mid-1970s, two Stanford researchers named Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman introduced the idea of public key cryptography. A few years later, Ronald Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Edelman, the RSA in RSA encryption, turned that idea into a practical algorithm. RSA encryption is a specific form of public key cryptography that uses very large prime numbers to create a pair of keys. One is public to lock the message, and one is private to unlock it. It's the reason you can safely type your credit card number into Amazon without ever meeting them to exchange a secret key first. For the first time, ordinary people could in theory exchange secrets securely over an open network. This was revolutionary and terrifying to governments. Up until then, strong cryptography was almost exclusively in the hands of militaries and intelligence agencies. If everyday citizens could suddenly lock their digital doors, law enforcement and spies feared they would lose visibility into communications. Their response was not lightly. What set the cryptography wars off was a decision by the US government that encryption was officially classified as munition. Yes, the same legal category as tanks, bombs, and missiles. Exporting strong encryption software without government approval was a crime. This is an important point and something to let sink in for a minute. In order for the government to keep the internet open, they made it illegal to have any secrets on the open World Wide Web. You can probably now imagine why this started the full-on cryptography wars. A 20-year struggle between governments trying to keep control and technologists determined to put encryption into the hands of everyone. In 1991, software engineer Phil Zimmerman released Pretty Good Privacy, or PGP, a free tool that let anyone encrypt email and files with strong public key cryptography. He shared it widely on the early internet so activists, journalists, and ordinary users could protect their communications. Because strong encryption was treated like munition for export, PGP spreading outside the US looked to the authorities like an unlicensed weapon export. In 1993, US Customs opened a criminal investigation into Zimmerman for alleged export violations. The investigation ran for years and created a chilling effect for individual developers. Enter the Cypherpunks. At the same time that Phil Zimmerman was fighting his PGP battle, a group of activists, mathematicians, and hackers were organizing around a radical idea. If privacy was essential for freedom in the digital age, the only way to protect it was to build it. They called themselves Cypherpunks. Their motto, Cypherpunks write code. In other words, don't wait for governments or corporations to give you privacy, but make it yourself. In 1988, Timothy C. May published the Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto, predicting a future where cryptography would upend the balance of power between individuals and states. In 1992, Eric Hughes and John Gilmore started the Cypherpunks mailing list in the Bay Area. It quickly grew into thousands of members worldwide, sharing codes, tactics, and philosophy. And then, in 1993, Eric Hughes wrote a Cypherpunks manifesto, declaring, Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. We cannot expect governments, corporations, or other large faceless organizations to grant us privacy. We must defend our own privacy if we expect to have any. PGP was proof their ideas could work, and the government's crackdown only fueled their urgency. So what started as a government investigation into one man, Zimmerman, and PGP, quickly turned into a wider cultural battle. Developers, academics, and activists argued that code itself was a form of free speech, and that banning or restricting it was a violation of free expression. To make that point, MIT Press published the full PGP source code as a printed book in 1995. Why? Because under US law, books were protected speech under the First Amendment, but code was treated like a weapon. By printing it, they highlighted the absurdity. The exact same information was legal if bound in paper, but illegal if stored on a floppy disk. Hackers and activists got even more creative. They printed the RSA encryption algorithm on t-shirts and bumper stickers with slogans like, "This t-shirt is a munition." Wearing one across a border technically counted as exporting arms. It was satire with teeth, a way to make the stakes visible to anyone, not just programmers. The message was clear. Privacy is a right, and trying to ban it is futile. So how did it end with PGP? By 1996, after 3 years of pressure, the US government quietly dropped its investigation into Zimmerman without charges. By that point, the genie was out the bottle. PGP had already spread worldwide and become the backbone of a new generation of secure communication tools. Zimmerman became a symbol of digital civil liberties, and the case showed that attempts to ban cryptography would only strengthen the movement around it. So, it was time for a plan B, the Clipper chip. When the pushback around PGP made it clear that banning cryptography outright was not going to work, the US government tried a different approach. If they couldn't stop strong encryption, maybe they could build in a secret way around it. In 1993, the Clinton administration unveiled the Clipper chip, a government-designed encryption device intended for phones and computers. It promised strong encryption for users, but with one catch. Every device included a built-in backdoor key. Officially, this was called key escrow. The idea was that law enforcement could unlock any conversation or file if they got the legal authority. The pitch was, trust us, only the good guys will use it. But the backlash was instant and fierce. The Clipper chip quickly became a symbol of government overreach in the digital era. Public trust collapsed, adoption never took off, and by the late 90s, the project was quietly abandoned. Then, what did businesses do? While governments were busy fighting to keep control, the private sector saw the problem from a different angle: money. By 1994, the web was growing fast, but one thing held it back. No one was going to type their credit card number into a website if every packet was readable as a postcard. Enter Netscape. Founded that same year by Silicon Valley veteran Jim Clark and 23-year-old programmer Mark Andreessen, fresh off building the Mosaic browser at the University of Illinois, which became the first widely used web browser. Andreessen would later co-found the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z, and backed companies like Facebook, Airbnb, and Coinbase. But back then, he was just a student turned entrepreneur with a bold idea. If the web was going to go mainstream, it needed trust. I don't know why, but it was the first browser that I downloaded outside of the usual Internet Explorer that came on Windows. It felt cool, it felt different, you could add themes, etc. for the first time. I really liked it. Good times. So Netscape built SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, a protocol that put an encrypted lock around web traffic. Suddenly, you could send sensitive data across the internet, shopping, banking, even logging in, without worrying that anyone along the way could read it. It is the little padlock in your browser that became the symbol of trust on the web. More importantly, it turned cryptography from a political and academic debate into a business necessity. Without SSL, there would be no Amazon, no eBay, no PayPal, no digital economy as we know it. While the US government was still treating strong encryption like a weapon, two entrepreneurs and a scrappy startup had already put it in the hands of millions. People didn't need to understand the math. They just clicked the lock and felt safe. So that was kind of the end of round one. In 1999, the Clinton administration finally conceded. Export controls were relaxed and mass-market products like web browsers, email clients, and operating systems were free to ship with strong encryption worldwide. What had been treated as a weapon, again in the same legal category as missiles, was now just a standard feature of everyday software. The first crypto wars were over, but the outcome wasn't absolute. Governments hadn't given up. They had simply lost the opening round, and the battles over backdoors, privacy, and control of digital infrastructure would return again and again. A great example of that is the Apple versus the FBI battle. In December 2015, after the San Bernardino terrorist attack, the FBI recovered an iPhone used by one of the shooters. They asked a judge to order Apple to build a special version of iOS that will be able to disable safeguards and let investigators guess unlimited passcodes without the phone erasing itself. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, refused. In an open letter, Apple argued that creating such software would be a backdoor in everything. If it existed once, it could be demanded again and again by courts around the world and eventually could be stolen or abused. Apple framed it as a matter of safety for all customers, not a favor to just one suspect. The fight dominated headlines for weeks. Then, in March 2016, the FBI abruptly dropped the case. A third-party security company, later revealed to be Asymmetric Security, had discovered the vulnerability in the iPhone 5C's hardware. Their exploit let investigators brute force the passcode without triggering the phone's data wipe. The government got into this one phone, but the principle at stake didn't disappear. You cannot create a backdoor that only good guys can use. It's a slippery slope. You do not want to go there. So why does this history matter now? We're back at the same fork in the road, only this time the battlegrounds are maybe even bigger. There is AI. Will the most powerful models be open or locked behind walls of a few companies? There's privacy. Will we get true control over our own data or perpetual surveillance in the name of safety? Centralization versus decentralization, something you hear me talk about a lot. Will the digital world belong to a handful of platforms or to the communities that build on them? The internet we use today with e-commerce, encrypted messaging, and basic trust exists because technologists, businesses, and activists stood firm in the 90s. They fought for the simple idea that privacy is not a privilege, it's a right. And that idea matters even more now. The more our lives move online, our work, our health, our relationships, our creativity, the more those rights must be carried over. We don't accept governments opening every letter we send by post, right? So we shouldn't accept it for our emails, our chats, or our data either. Freedom in the digital age is not an upgrade or a nice to have. It's the same freedom we demand offline, extended to the spaces where we now actually live, online. The crypto wars taught us one timeless truth. If we give up that freedom once, we may never get it back. And in a world that's more digital every day, that will mean giving up freedom itself. So, thank you again for checking in. That was it for this week's feature episode. We've talked about privacy a lot. I think it's a very important topic, but this is not just a privacy podcast, of course. There will be more episodes diving into everything new with AI, blockchain, gaming, whatever is hot and trending at the moment and that I find interesting to share with you all. So I hope you enjoyed today's history lesson. And if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and make sure to give us 5 stars on the podcast platforms. That will help me a lot. So thanks again. My name is Frans Jacobs, Band of Insiders podcast, and see y'all next week. Peace.